Good afternoon. This is Muse Beam, and I'm Bob Rixon. And today we're going to be listening to Charles Olson, reading from his Mayan letters. I don't presume to know anything about the subject aside from what I read in magazines and the like. But I do know that the Mayans were one of the great civilizations with the added attraction that nobody in the Western world paid much attention to them until a little more than 100 years ago. And that I know that the classic period of the civilization happened between, I guess, AD 250, AD 900, followed by a kind of a sporadic decline. Since what Charles Olson is about is language, the Mayan calendar was deciphered around 1900, but nobody knew what the dates on it meant. At the time, Olson went to Yucatan in the early 50s, and the hieroglyphic language still had not been penetrated. And it was this door, this language, that he wanted unlocked. And he also called for a full survey of Mayan sites before the anthropologists undertook any more large-scale excavations. And he could get along all that well with the anthropologists. The hieroglyphics have since yielded to study, revealing the rise and fall of powerful political families, much more personal and worldly civilization, complete with human icons comparable to, say, Abe Lincoln or something like that. That is real people and real political turmoil. In any case, the civilization collapsed from south to north, and no one is sure why, although ecological disasters have been proposed as a cause. Olson, of course, taught at Black Mountain, influenced the Ed Dorns, Robert Creeley's, Joel Oppenheimer's of the world. And these letters were written to Robert Creeley. There's 3 of them. We read actually backwards in dates. In the first letter we're going to hear, which is actually number 13 to Robert Creeley, Olson begins with a poem, kind of a poem list of meaningful Mayan symbols. But then he talks about humanism being an anthropomorphic barrier against reality. That is, if you think your dog's a human, that's anthropomorphic. His complaint is quite different from that of the fundamentalist Christians, whose God, after all, is, I guess, the ultimate human. And when we talk about this sort of humanism that Olson talks about, we really are talking about ecology. As usual with Olson, there's lots of asides and commentaries not included in the written texts, and the written texts can be found in his selected writings from New Directions. So this is Charles Olson.
A letter from Yucatan, written Sunday, April 1st, actually to Robert Curley, who edited this book from which it's read, which is the Mayan Letters. I was then in Yucatan, actually trying to see what actually the archaeology and the hieroglyphs were of the Central American Indian. What continues to hold me is the tremendous levy on all objects as they present themselves to human sense in this glyph world. And the proportion, the distribution of weight given the same parts of all seems exceptionally distributed and accurate. That is, that sun, moon, Venus, other constellations in the zodiac, snakes, ticks, vultures, jaguar, owl, frog, feathers, peyote, water lily, not to speak of fish, caracal, tortoise, and above all, human eyes, hands, limbs. Plus exceedingly careful observation of all possible intervals of same, as well as all above, to precise dimension of eclipses, say, and time of, and all the astronomical carefulnesses. And the weights of same, each to the other, is immaculate as well as full. That is, the gate to the center was here, as accurate as what you and I have been, that's what B. Curley and myself at that date, talking about. Man as object, in the field of force, declaring self as force because is force, in exactly such relation and can accomplish expression of self as force by conjecture and displacement in a context best now seen as space more than a time such, which I think would be needed today to be qualified as particularly true in 1951, and quite almost differently now as literally time more than as space such, which I take it, that is the older direction of that, which I take it is precise contrary to what we have had as humanism, with man out of all proportion of relations, thus so miscended, becomes dependent on only a whole series of human references which so make only an anthropomorphism, and thus make mush of any reality, conspicuously man's own, not to speak of how all other forces, ticks, water lilies, or snails, become only descriptive objects in what used to go with antimacassars and planetariums and goldfish bowls and whatever you would think as furnishings. This gate gone in by, in a second stage follows. That is, that invention produces narration in verse, also of a contrary order, which for my dough is today something which is, and the only modern example I have to actually, in the instance the Odyssey, is Melville, simply because humanism is, that is Homer's, coming in, and to some extent, that is space, as Melville had it, is going out. And I take it a Summa poem or Maya glyph is more pertinent to our purposes than anything else, because each of these people and their workers had forms which unfolded directly from content. Said content itself a disposition toward reality which understood man as only force in field of force, containing multiple other expressions. One delightful fact just picked up, that all Mayan jobs, says Tatiana Pruskuriakov, are built around a single human figure. For example, in this room there used to be the bone, which is now kept otherwise, of what appears to be Quetzalcoatl, and it's one human figure with a passage from the thigh to the knee running down, and it's the only known human carved bone that the Maya did with their stone instruments, and it's so small and so delicate it's unimaginable that it should have been incised with such accuracy. And in fact, the bone itself is literally as much a piece of sculpture or architecture, or whatever you want to call it, as a steel or a building. Which is, of course, that, if we call it that any longer, the ego, which you, me, Mayan X, were, are, he who is interested enough to, seeing it all, get it down. What has to be battered down completely is that this has anything to do with stage of development. On the contrary, the capacity for the observation in the first place and the invention that might, and I'm saying can follow, has no more to do with brick or new wheels or metal or stone or industrial age or technological age or acoustical age or atomic age or agricultural society. That the difference is that simply that there are differences of people, and yet that if a single figure we are alike. Therefore there is no history. I still keep coming back to the notion. We are merely the second time. That's as much history as I'll permit in, which ain't history at all. That is, I mean, this the second time in the whole human species that a change has come. Seems so only because we have been all dragooned previously into a notion that what came between was better, which is eatable shit for the likes of those who like saying. Animation of what presents itself from the thing on outwards. Rock as vessel, vessel as tail, creating men and women, because narrator and or poet happen to be man or woman, thus human figure as part of universe of things. Other things are the same, the provocations say. Only, and as such, the provocations. The I in Mayan. At the time, for example, I didn't even know, when I wrote this letter, that for example, the very condition of great was such in the hands of a poet like Homer or Hesiod that they were, the words for I are only what an I does. There is no generalization for an I. And it's one of the things that we have been so conditioned by that we almost have to unlearn it, forget it, and start again, as though all we knew was what given eyes that we see are capable of. And the I in Mayan, in fact, the bottom of this page that I'm reading from was my attempt to draw really a head I'd seen in the Museo in Campeche of simply two eyes on a little pottery clay figure, which just seemed interesting. I can't show you that on tape, but I can finish the approach to the passage that, like I say, that the Mayan, other Indian as well, and the Sumerian, which is something that Cree and I had spoken of together, that Sumerian fixes, which is what I'm using as a definition of what's normally known as cuneiform wedges. Jesus, I'm saying to Curly, in these glyphs, how, or stones, how, with any kind of device, the eye takes up life. I get contra the Greek, Roman, or even Byzantine examples, like, say, those enormous eyes of Constantine in that statue that's in the northern city of Greece. I lost his name at the moment. And then I draw this little monster with eyes made as I drew it. And the hands, fingers. I have in the other room, for example, fingers, literal fingers that I found in another ruinous down the highway from the house I wrote this letter. And it's just exactly as fingers are, except that they're a completely different proportion, have nails, and they seem to me still delicious sculpture. This is peculiarly brilliant at Copan, that whole ruin, which was in Honduras, and I have not visited, but at the Museo at that time I was examining the most marvelous drawings by Hipólito Sanchez of those ruins, and trying to understand the glyphs from these drawings as well. Where, if any dancer now living had sense, from my point of view, at that date I would have said any dancer would have gained from simply being in Copan and seeing those stones, he'd be finding out how to exploit this part of his instrument. Not to speak about how the face is. The other dominant glyph, in addition to the abstracts of all other natural forms, is the human or animal heads.
Think about going somewhere where you find the remnants of a civilization and you don't know their language, you don't know their written language, you don't know how they lived aside from a few monuments, and there's nobody around that seems to be able to tell you. That's almost like going to another planet and sitting in the middle of all of that with your noggin full of Western knowledge, as Olson had, and trying to figure out how these people thought. The whole weight of Western myth, I won't even use history, but just the myth we carry with us, that we take for, we don't even know it. A lot of us don't even know it. We don't know the myth, but it's still there. It's still in the culture. Well, anyway, after a brief section from letter number 7, catch the comment on ecology here, by the way. Olson reads a part of letter number 5, beginning with talking about how if you base a culture on knowledge, unfortunately you're no match for one based on guns or bows and arrows. And then he goes to a poem, I guess about a Mayan figure, and then he quotes a date. This date, Olson, it's hard to understand Olson reading if you don't have the writing in front of you. But this date is an example of what translators found. Just a date, nothing more than a date. What if you came to America and you managed to translate July 4th, 1776, and that's all. That's all you could. That's all you knew. Well, it's typical of what translators have to deal with. The rest is a meditation on I think, a possible universal link between the star planet Venus and the sea. Something the Mayans themselves may have just happened to them, I guess. So this is parts of letter 7 and letter number 5, Charles Olson.
Yeah, I love that passage that is in letter 7. One of the things that stares you in the face on the equator, of course, is water. And I wanted to write clearly about that too. So I said, for example, what I can't find anything out about is water. Judging from the business here now, and adding to it the apparent fact that the Maya depended for water, and it's not true actually, the ancient Maya controlled water beautifully. But at that time I didn't know that as well as and I had to observe this incredible situation in which they were begging water. In fact, they used to come to the pozo in our house and with jugs and ask for water. It got so bad that one day there were 25 women asking for water because we were the only well in the whole of this town of 1,000 people. And I continue now that what I was saying about I'm saying too clearly that the upper limestone crust collapsed and that created these huge cenotes near which they built their cities. Now that's not quite true actually. The ancient Maya had actually built very careful reservoirs. I learned of that later. And I go on to say, I guess that this people had a very ancient way of not improving on nature. That is, that it is not a question of either intelligence or spirituality. But another thing, something Americans have a hard time getting their minds around. A form or a bias of attention which does not include improvements. This is a section from letter 5 in the Mayan letters, and actually the date of it is relevant to the problem in the passage I read, because it's written from Lerma, which was outside of the city of Campeche, on March 8th. Which is just about the big last point of time before the heat comes. And at the moment, I was writing to clearly trying to come to grips with a thing which is actually in the Mayans see, a god which is well known, a hero god. I think anyone would know as Quetzalcoatl, and is in Maya Kukulkan. And I'm going to be using the two names, switching from one to the other. Because actually Kukulkan would be the local name as I was. And I'm starting at the whole question of from like the very beginning. How can I pick up on these engines? That is, as Stevens, Prescott, Parkman did not so pick them up 100 years ago. And at the same moment of time that Melville say was picking up in the Pacific, what were they doing, or what have we been doing with the Indians in the States, or as I was then in Central America? What's wrong? Or likewise, even why don't we know anything about the Sumerians? Or EMEO? Or USA today? No, erased it, but somewhere I've been dragged off methodologically by my own mention of the substantive, and I'm sucked into a substantive argument, which is not what we're here for. Let me try it another way, for it's still this man, Kukulkan, that I'm talking about. Shots. First, are not the Maya the most important characters in the whole panorama? Diorama was the word contemporary to above fine for workers, simply because the top class in their society, the bosses, were a class whose daily business was knowledge or its offshoot culture. That thus a man of Kukulkan's temper and interest could become big boss and then gone? And that any such society goes down easily before a gun or bows and arrows when Chichimecs come along with same? The absolute quote here is one prime devil, Goebbels, who said, "When I hear the word culture, I reach for my gun." Second, that such a society is precisely the contrary, really the contrary, not the opposite, to use Blake's careful discrimination, and by so doing, show up the collective or communist deal for what it is, and will continue to be as long as the rest of the world wants what America has had. Comes up out of the sea, a sea horse. My question is, where here do the rains come from? Is the serpent? Who shall fight the jaguar? Another norther of another season is weather. Here on the earth, because the earth turns eastward, is all movements. As was the people's coming, is it from the west? They say he was the wind, they say. Also rain, anyway. He was water, not sun, fire, not this heat which makes the day less than the night. He wore a hat, a sort of silly hat, had short breeches, a tortoise back with mirror on it, and a tail. He died just as the heat was at its worst, just on the day the fields were burnt, just that day the morning star rose anew. His eyes, she said, were like a caracole, and when he left us, he walked straight out into the sea, west. He was also a bachelor. But what seemed most important, he was a child of water. They figured it was precisely what they needed, was the image of themselves. It's a beautiful thing what Slater found, and you were right, of course, and I'm so happy to have the drawing. It bears right in on what I've been turning over. I figure now that why, as I think I told you, I abandoned him in the tooth, in the attempt to use him in both the Kingfishers and the Praises, was that it would be Kukulkan. It is this thing of the sea, which one finds out here, and nobody told me, and which sea is the addition to a Miss Venus, which makes up a package. A favor, if you have an encyclopedia at hand or any source, could you write me what this damn star Venus does with itself in a year? That is there a coincidence of its brightest brightness with April 12th or thereabouts? We await right now, that is, that day, or because they tell us on that date the farmers burn their fields, and for a month it is here as though there were an eclipse, or as it was there last fall when the Canadian woods were burning down. Forget it. I guess the time has come for me to dig this business, and it's large and better be done whole. All I was after, I'll tell you another day. But first, what cools me is a sentence like this from Spindon. Date 1, 11, 814, 316, 10 Sib 4 Yats, which would be May 5th, 1136, like AD in our book. This phenomenon took place before the Toltecs had conquered Chichen Itza, but easily enough it may represent data upon which Quetzalcoatl worked and which possibly he presented in his sacred book. Or, in the Vienna Codex, the Venus staff, which Quetzalcoatl is chief bearer of, is stuck in a valley between two hills beside a trumpet shell. Which trumpet shell I find plenty of. Even one I found the other day at Kukulkan's Isla, and is of course our seashell, or here, the caracol. The astronomer's house at Chichen is a snail. It's the damnedest thing when I cannot get by the tail. For you see, here is this supposed land Maize people who use, first, for the house which brought them culture, the astronomy house, a seashell, and for the man who appears to have made the language of this people for time in the universe available to all neighboring peoples, a seahorse. And this had broken in on me before I got your letter with Slater's drawing yesterday. The evidences Spindon here above is referring to are not Maya, but Miztec. In other words, of the Central Valley of Mexico, not Yucatan. So that the whole picture has shifted wider and out west. In fact, what I ought to be doing, am, in fact, trying to, or proposing, is, like, quote, the sea in Maya, and Mexican cultures and economies. And somewhere in this mixing of the two geographies is the key to why there is a Kukulkan here and a Quetzalcoatl there. Same man, same imagery, the serpent with fuzz. Sea serpent? What the astronomy establishes is that the complex is water, that is, Venus sign. Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan, Venus god, April 13, 1208 thereafter. Is also 9 wind, is also rain, the seasonal need, is also somehow serpent, contrary of sun, which is jaguar, is, shall we allow for the present, seahorse? In other words, see what I mean? Snails for noise, water for maize, and a man from the west. Where does it the winds? Yes, northers. And the rain also come from? Oh yes, as of the wind. Oh yeah, as of the wind. The drawing of Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan. Most like Anne's. He is actually not of him himself, but of the wind, God K of the codices, who is, to be sure, by reasoning from a like union in Mexican mythology, seen as Kukulkan. Let me send that drawing back for Anne's to me. I end the letter with a drawing of Kukulkan.
Well, okay, but it's nice to hear him talk. It's nice to hear that. It's nice to hear that great voice. This recording of Charles Olson, which is from Folkways, also contains some of his Maximus poems. And I think it's still available. Charles Olson reading Mayan letters from down there in Yucatan, down in the jungles. You've been listening to Muse Beam, and I'm Bob Rixon. You can write us here, if you like, at Muse Beam, WFMU, East Orange, New Jersey, Uppsala College, East Orange, New Jersey, 07019. And I thank you for tuning in.
Hi, this is Joe Renner, and these are the Rixon tapes. Bob Rixon was a poet and broadcaster, a pioneer of freeform radio from 1981 at the FMU studios in New Jersey. He passed away on May 8th, 2014 at the age of 66. These tapes are a tribute to his work as a broadcaster and poet. Help this channel by hitting the subscribe button. Thank you very much.